Question number one. For managing voice acting, what are some things that are commonly mistaken or difficult that you see in actors, also other directors?
Well, I won't speak to other directors because I don't work with them. I did early on, and they were all great. I mean, really, what it comes down to is what the actor's background is. So a lot of times, a common thing is if there are on-camera actors, they tend to perform a lot closer than we need in the booth. Actually, stage actors tend to translate more immediately into the booth because of projection things, of using you know of getting a lot of the communication across through the voice rather than with your face, or gestures and things like that, because those don't mean anything to us unless you're on a mocap stage or whatever, but when you're in the booth. So a first common thing is just about how to work the mic and the room to get sort of the vibrant results that we need, in the game. And then secondly is, especially if they haven't done a lot of game work, there's a lot of things that are very unique to games. And I think we talked about this kind of stuff, like that are basically user interface elements and stuff that clarity or some other aspect than narrative or character takes precedent, especially a lot of the informational items that happen, whether your base is under attack or whatever it might be. You have to deliver those in a way that are clear, but still within character, but they might veer from strictly in character if we have to err on the side of clarity or understandability or whatever it might be. So I think just those notions that are specific to games sometimes catch actors off guard, even if they're really good actors and they can get into character or whatever. There are elements that are unique to games that they just got to get used to.
I'll pretend I'm a student because I want to ask you one question. Are stage trained actors more likely to get in the zone faster than those that are not stage trained?
They are more likely to get into the zone technically. So for the technical concerns of clarity, of being able to whisper to the last row and that kind of stuff, and also be able to sustain, because stage actors who perform most every night, they have techniques for keeping their voice, being able to maintain through a couple hours. Whereas strictly on camera people don't necessarily stretch that muscle very much. So yes, there's now, as far as the ability
performance
to act, that's different. I mean, that doesn't, you can come from wherever, and as long as you have that skill set and have been training that skill set, you can do that. But as far as the technical side, yes, stage actors tend to translate better.
Right. Okay. What influenced you to manage voice acting, and what are your advices on how to start before working with a company or studio?
The thing that so when I was in-house as a composer and a sound designer and eventually a lead, the last project we did was called Halo Wars, and it was led creatively by a guy named Graham Devine, and Graham is amazing. And he, very early on in the process of before it was Halo Wars, it was going to be our own story, so not in the Halo universe. And he had written character diaries and things like this well before we got into, working on the actual game itself. And he would just send them out. He was so in tune with trying to communicate character first and then kind of finding ways to marry that with the needs of the game. That was my first exposure of that, doing that really deeply, because the Age of Empires series of games, while they did have characters in them, they weren't driving the story necessarily, and we weren't doing a ton of storytelling. We did have cinematic moments and things like that, but this was definitely a narrative driven game, in the beginning, and that revealed to me how much you could get out of narrative and character. And then at the same time, we also delved deeply into technical sides of things as well. And so that really kind of piqued my interest. And when Ensemble closed its doors, I had a choice. I was a musician, I was a sound designer, and also whatever sort of dialogue lead you want to call it. And I was just really drawn to doing narrative performance in games. It just seemed like such a unique space. And at that time, we're talking in the, Ensemble shut down in 2009, beginning of 2009. So things had really kind of ramped up of being able to do more and more narrative elements in games and go deeper and deeper. And so being that, like, as I mentioned before, being a game developer who wanted to be a director, and now I've been able, thankfully, to prove myself as a director, that just really scratched an itch and scratched out a niche as well for me that just sat with me. I wasn't really looking, it was almost like, also I wasn't looking to be a full-time musician and write music for other people.
Mhm.
I liked it when it was me and my best friend were doing it, and we, I came up through there from the ground up, but I wasn't looking to adjust my technique as a composer to anybody, right? And I
Mhm.
also just didn't think I'd be that great at it. And if you're not confident, then don't do it. Uh, so that part of that question, that's easier to answer. As far as like, what to do before working with the studio, well, there's nothing specific to directing that would be any different than any other discipline, and that's just representing your dedication and your interest to it. So if it's your first interview, for whatever position you might be interviewing for, just put forward what it is about you that draws you to this, and then go from there. A lot of directing, especially, is you can come from any background and be a director. It's really what you bring to it in the moment, and then how you grow over time with it. So,
Okay.
really, yeah.
I'm sorry, having knowledge of composing music and audio, what is your advice for what program you use for audio? And is it good for beginners to start with?
I'm on a Mac. I use Logic, and I love Logic. I think Logic is great because it can go as deep as you need to as a professional, system, but it also is really good as an entry. It also depends on how you want to compose. Loop-based systems like Ableton are really useful too, depending on what kind of stuff you want to do. But if you want to do traditional, or start out with like, I want to be able to write any kind of song or record any kind of thing, I think Logic is really, really great. I know a lot of people use Reaper as well, which is has that open source sort of based thing, that a lot of users influence where it goes, and there's a great community for Reaper, so that probably could be useful. I've never used it myself, but I think Logic is great. Now, Macs obviously ship with GarageBand. I never use it, but it's kind of Logic Lite, and that's a good environment. But I honestly think Logic is so great because it comes with so much as far as like sample packs and things like that. Just with it used to be even more expensive, but I think it's relatively affordable for everything that comes with it. And if you're a songwriter and need, I think they do it now. Me being a drummer, I never take advantage of their drumming sort of pre-produced packs, but I go and check them out, and they're very useful, as being like, I'm going to write this style of song, and they have different creators for different drum patterns and things like that, which is really, really interesting. It's a very human way of, doing these creative packs. And so I really like what they put together, and I would just say Logic.
How much are voice actor how much are voice actor directors needed in the industry right now?
Uh, a lot, I guess. It's interesting because you can come from any background and then do directing. You also then, if you are going to do it, you need to do it and get your hours in and keep doing it and keep getting better. So there are a lot of companies that internally their initial thing is to think, I want to direct, we should just direct this ourselves, or somebody has an interest or think, oh, I know how to do this. And the fact is you don't. And neither did I until I started doing it. And then I had to prove it over and over again, as well. So I think the guidance and the organization, if a director is good, especially in the game side of things, it requires a lot of almost like producer, like with studio producer style thing, not record producer. Um, and it takes a lot of organization and managing a lot of different people's, I'm going to say egos, but not in a bad way. You want to be in tune with what everybody needs and what they want, and then how to bring that all together, not just tell an actor what to do. That is not what it is. So it's really important to have people who are good at that, and also focus on that, as just like with anything, you're going to get the best results from that's people's prime you know uh, vocation, and so it's great if you can do it. And I won't say it will fail if you don't have a director, but it will go a lot smoother if you have a director, especially somebody who knows what they're doing and knows how to organize things and can pay attention to things that will influence the bottom line. Because across the board, just like anything else, it all comes down to money, and you need to take advantage of what little money you've been allocated. Because I guarantee you, in the project scope of things, audio and then voice under that, and anything going under that gets the minimal amount of money, generally
Mhm.
speaking,
Mhm.
allocated into it, though it is an expensive endeavor working with actors and studios and things. So it's not cheap. So you really have to get stretch all your time, every minute and every dollar you have. And so a good director can help take advantage of that as well.
Okay. Does the voice acting recording process take longer due to having to do things remotely, or does it take the same amount of time as before?
Yes. So to answer an or question is yes. It has more technical difficulties that can stop down a session. Once you get in the flow, especially if you're working with people and characters you've already worked with in person, then it can get to a reasonable amount of an equivalent amount of time. But it definitely can very quickly go into, well, we just lost an hour we wouldn't have lost,
Yeah.
So things are changing all the time. Heck, I just did a session this morning. We had a Zoom was a part of it. I was logged into Zoom. That was all great. And then I logged in again for this session and I had to update. Like within minutes, things change in real time, right? Now that didn't cause me any issue, but things are going crazy all the time remotely. That can just slow things down. But if things are moving outside of technical difficulties, you can get it to an equivalent pace.
And you had been doing remote sessions before the COVID, right? I mean, there were times where access, you just didn't have access to the.
I mean, the typical remote I still would typically be in studio with the engineer, and then the actor might be, remote. And then generally our clients are remote. They might have one or two representatives in person if they're local, but if they're not local and they're not flying down, then they're Skyping in to listen in and that kind of stuff. But, and then, yeah, there are other times I'll be directing somebody in New Zealand or London or whatever it might be too. So yeah, remote has always been there.
Here comes an interesting question. How do you handle voice actors who are stubborn and believing that their take is perfect and doesn't need a critique?
Well, using a word like stubborn and even that question is a little bit loaded the thing to do is to not go into a situation loaded in lots of different ways. Don't go into a session loaded, but don't go into it with a loaded notion that there is anything actorly you're going to have to be dealing with at all anyway. They're people. You have to establish trust, and you go into it at the very beginning being open to their perspectives, and then also being bold enough to shape them in a way that you understand how, and this will again reveal itself over time, how they take information better. If they trust you, then they are willing to even say things like, I wouldn't normally do it that way, but I'll go ahead and give it a shot. And 9 times out of 10, if I'm asking to do something that wouldn't be how they normally would do it, it's the right thing to do because I'm asking for it for a specific reason. I'm not just going to go in and then go into, that's one thing. Okay, you talk about whether using directors or not. A director, in my mind, shouldn't get bogged down in sort of talking about esoteric things and trying to find ways of like being more purple in this performance or whatever. That's not very useful, especially when we're talking about tight times and things like that. But in order for me to communicate that to the actor, it all comes about how I establish myself from the very beginning. And I need to seem confident and knowledgeable, even if I don't know what I'm doing. Yes. I need to feel like I know what I'm doing. So there's a bunch of BSing going on, but not in the sense of fooling somebody, in the sense of just putting down a foundation of like, we're in a space, a trustworthy space, and I'm here to make sure that you feel that you can do the best work you can do. If I establish that, then I don't run into stubbornness that much. Occasionally you hear a lot of horror stories and things like that, but I don't run into them, and I think that's why.
I take that as a you've never worked with William Shatner comment.
Well, and see, Shatner, I actually even almost defend his little his position, because I don't think I don't know the specifics of the classic sort of Shatner voice recording session thing, but I would say that I feel like a level of trust wasn't established enough,
Yeah.
But then again, sometimes people are just cranky, and that'll happen. We're dealing with humans.
Sure. I would think with your articulation skill set, especially when it comes to just hearing you talk, I would imagine you've had people say, thank you for giving me a good idea of where it needed to go, rather than spending an hour wasting time. I think you could probably get them in that zone real fast.
That's a very, very astute assumption or observation, because that is the case. And that always makes me feel good. Like at the end of a session, there tends to be a lot of, oh, that was awesome, no matter what happened, right?
Sure.
You get a lot of loves and hugs, and that's the way it should be. What I listen for, if I'm ever going to I don't take compliments very well. But if I'm going to take anything, it's when somebody says something specific that I did that helped them or whatever. It wasn't just an awesome session. And I do hear, thankfully, from a lot of actors, like, you really get me there, efficiently or quickly, or, I really, I didn't know what I was doing, but I really felt like you knew what you're doing enough that, I could roll with it and that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
So I do hear that.
because most actors just want to please. That seems to be the overwhelming thing.
Which is that's not to take too long here, but just to, the idea of that is something that, again, a good director will understand that, to whereas like the client might be coming in with the idea of, I can just say all these different things and the actor will pick out what they need. No, the actor is a sponge and is grabbing onto everything. So if you put an extra exclamation point, they're going to roll with it in a way that you weren't quite thinking about it, because they are searching for ways to please at all times and do things right. And that's why I really do try to narrow down, to some specifics. After you start out a session talking about the broader things and giving them the bucket of stuff they can pull from a backstory that they can hold on to. Once you start taking, you can really focus in on what that line needs or what this section needs.
Speaking of focusing in, do you often or ever have sessions when you have clients co-directing and they're hearing from two different masters?
I serve a lot of masters all the time. Yes. So, and again, it's about supporting what they need too. And what I try to do is show that I'm getting you what you need in an efficient manner.
Yeah.
And they tend to settle into a comfortable space.
Yeah, you're working as a translator to some degree between client and performer as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Last question. How often would you have to bring back talent due to rewrites?
Well, we talked about budgets and money. A lot of times that's not even budgeted in. So that we try to catch that as much as we can, or give alternate reads and stuff if we don't know exactly how it's going to be implemented. But it does happen. A good budget will budget in pickup sessions. Now, you might grab from that pickup session you needed an extra session with an actor just because the bulk material came in that we weren't expecting or whatever. So you play with it, move some numbers around. But planning for pickups is good. And usually I would say pickups are within the single digit percentages of, if not even less than that. We tend to do a good job with enough prep and pre-production to avoid that,
Okay. Well, Kevin, thank you. Your time is valuable. I appreciate you jumping on with me today so quickly. Thank you again for your time.
And like I told you, I love talking shop, so I'll do it anytime.
All right, Kevin. Thank you so much. Have a good day.